Today we'll be reading from Surah 16, verse 124. Let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. The Sabbath abrogated. The Sabbath was decreed only for those who ended up disputing it, Jews and Christians. Your Lord is the one who will judge them on the day of resurrection regarding their disputes. So this verse is referring to Sabbath that was decreed for the Jews and Christians, and we know that in the Quran God has abrogated it, right? So this shows to us that if there were any practices that were actually decreed by God for the people, and then they no longer need to be practiced, or there is a change, then God would definitely mention in the Quran, So, a lot of times people will use that example to try to prove that circumcision is part of the religion by saying that it is not mentioned here that it should not be done, so it's okay. But the thing is that these are the practices that were decreed and then later on, no longer decreed, so they were abrogated. So the thing is, circumcision is not mentioned because it was not decreed. And it's one of those innovations that many people have been practicing among so many others, so they're not all mentioned by name and they don't need to be. And then also for people who think that it is part of religion and it was given to Abraham, but we no longer need to do it and it's fine if you do it, that's also wrong, because if there was any change regarding that, because in the injection, innovation, fabrication in the Bible, it says every child has to be done on the 8th day or they'll be cut off from the society, cut off from the people. So that makes it mandatory. So if it wasn't if it was the way they were saying it is, that it was mandatory and now it's not because it's not in the Quran, there should have been some kind of a verse, making that shift, and we have no such verses in the Quran, So the Quran is God's complete, perfect, and fully detailed message, and all the practices that are given are mentioned in the Quran. If there's anything that was being practiced before that doesn't have to be practiced or was changed, that is mentioned in the Quran. For example, fasting has been modified and it's been mentioned in the Quran, and having sexual intercourse during the nights of fasting has been mentioned in the Quran because previously God didn't allow that. Verse 125, how to spread God's message. You shall invite to the path of your Lord with wisdom and kind enlightenment, and debate with them in the best possible manner. Your Lord knows best who has strayed from his path, and he knows best who are the guided ones. And if you punish, you shall inflict an equivalent punishment. But if you resort to patience instead of revenge, it would be better for the patient ones. You shall resort to patience, and your patience is attainable only with God's help. Do not grieve over them, and do not be annoyed by their schemes. God is with those who lead a righteous life and with those who are charitable. So, mashallah, these are beautiful verses, and also, I've been part of debates previously where some people were of the idea that it is not our job to invite other people and stuff like that, and basically people just don't want to feel that they have a responsibility. But if you look at verse 125, it says that you shall invite to the path of your Lord with wisdom and kind enlightenment, and debate with them in the best possible manner. So one thing, it is telling us how to do it, but also God is telling us that we should do it, right? If God mentions it, then we must do it, right? It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to say no, you must do it, like with certain other adjectives, or other terms to mandate it, like it's compulsory. God's not going to say that, right? These are recommendations for us because we have the choice not to do them. And these are commandments that if we do them, we're gonna attain happiness, and if we don't, then obviously we're missing out, right? I mean, this is our roadmap to happiness, and so inviting to God's path, is something that we should be a part of, and we should do it in a way that is wise, and do it with kind enlightenment. Obviously, if you're just do it in a manner that doesn't attract anybody, and repulses them from the path, then you incur the responsibility of repelling that person from God's path. I mean, so we have to make sure that we do it with kind enlightenment, and we do it with wisdom. We need to find ways that in which we can make the message relatable and acceptable to a person. Something that finding out, for example, understanding that people are lost and they're looking for God. I mean, if they're not looking for God, they're at least looking for peace and happiness in this life, and they don't know how to get it. And so we have the perfect formula, and we can present to them in ways that appeals to them. And let's say, and we understand that this is the age of science and proofs, and we have the Quran's mathematical proofs, so we should present these proofs to people so they can accept the message and believe in it, and do it in a way that obviously is easy for people to absorb and accept, and we attract people this way rather than repulse them. And if we debate with them also, we have to debate with them in the best possible manner. Obviously, sometimes it can be difficult, but we all need to be patient also, and understand that there were prophets and messengers who were very resourceful, like God talks about in the Quran, and they still resorted to patience. Like, you had people who were like kings, right, like David, and he had to resort to patience. I mean, imagine he was resourceful, he could do anything, but they were all patient, and God says, if we punish, we shall inflict an equivalent punishment. So if someone hurts you or does something to you, you can inflict an equal punishment. You can revenge, but if you don't, it will atone for your sins. It's something that is righteous on your part. Being able to forgive and forego. Obviously, all of these apply to personal things. It's important to understand. We're supposed to, and it's hard. We're supposed to love our enemy, but these are people that are not our religious enemies. These are your personal enemies, right? So let's say you have a neighbor, like the messenger gives the example of a neighbor, building a fence or something on your property. Now that's that's they're transgressing, they're trespassing. Not only they're trespassing, but they're actually stepping into your property, making it yours. So it should make someone very upset, right? One very upset. But in response, you have to give a good response, in response to a bad response. And God says that this is difficult, but God says only the people who are fortunate are able to do that, right? And really, of course, that's not a joke, and it is no joke. I mean, it's definitely difficult, and it's easy to talk about it, but when you have to do it in the moment, I think that's when it becomes challenging, especially when you feel upset and you feel annoyed. But obviously, we understand that God is doing everything, and we look at these opportunities. We look at these situations as opportunities. Opportunities for us to gain a lot of credit, and opportunities for us to be among the fortunate ones. So, I mean, I'm thinking about an example just recently happened. There was something. I was actually driving, and there was something I was thinking about, and I was completely absorbed in my thoughts. and I was driving actually, and I was driving pretty fast, I think, and I ran a few stop signs actually, which I shouldn't, but I did, and I didn't realize it. I mean, I was just in a rush, and this woman, in a minivan, she saw me, and she started honking at me, like honking really bothers me, right? I mean, recently I got so irritated when I went to the Middle East because people were constantly honking, but and so like, it was kind of like a trigger, but so she started honking, and it wasn't like normal honking; it was like persistent honking, like repeated, and I heard it, and I was like, no, okay, I mean, definitely it's someone who's it's like one of those road rage things, and I mean, you're not supposed to confront the person, look at them in the eye. So I was just ignoring, and then I looked at her from my other eye, and I was just like shaking my head, like just giving her a signal that I can see, but I don't care, But I don't think she saw me because it was really dark, And but then again, I thought about it. I had some time to think about it, and then we got to the next light, and the next light she pulls in from the other side, and she rolls down her window, and she's like, you know what, you ran 2 stop signs, and I was thinking of a few things in my head. I was like, she's the Karen, she's this, she's that, in my head I'm thinking, and I was like, no, she's what she's saying. Let's just think about it. Like she's saying it for my good. So I rolled down my window and I said, oh, okay. I said, thank you, and she couldn't believe it. She thought she couldn't hear me. She was like, what? I said, thank you. I appreciate it. So she said, oh, okay, be safe, and then she left, and I felt better after that. I mean, compare that to a situation where you have a heated exchange. Obviously, it's not going to make you feel good, and you're probably going to be unhappy thinking about it later. Just an example. I mean, obviously, it wasn't a big deal or anything like that, and I'm not trying to brag about myself and how patient I am. I'm definitely not. But just to give you an example, so remember it next time. So God tells us that obviously, we shall resort to patience, and God tells us especially not to grieve over them and to not be annoyed by their scheming. So obviously, this also happens when you spread God's message too, right? I mean, you spread God's message, and there's ignorant people out there, and they'll say ignorant things without thinking, without examining any evidence, and just trolling online, for example, and or in the real world too. I mean, you can come across people like that, and they haven't really seen the message, and so I mean, we can get upset sometimes. Or there are people that will do things to try to scheme and try to hurt the believers, but God tells us not to grieve over them and not be annoyed by their schemes. If you are on the side of God and you do the things that are right, I mean, God will take care of every situation, no matter what it is. And even if people are scheming against you, no matter who they are and what kind of schemes they are, I mean, God looks after them, and God takes care of every situation. And God tells us to, also in this verse, God is with those who lead a righteous life and those who are charitable. So to be charitable also, God is reminding us that we should be charitable. It's important. The money that we have, it's all a test. So we make sure that we don't forget that, and invest towards our hereafter by giving to charity. So God will now continue reading Surah 17, the children of Israel, Bani Israel. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, most glorified is the one who summoned his servant Muhammad during the night from the sacred masjid of Mecca to the farthest place of prostration, whose surroundings we have blessed in order to show him some of our signs. He is the hearer, the seer. Similarly, we gave Moses the scripture and rendered it a beacon for the children of Israel, that you shall not set up any idol as a Lord and Master beside me. So we see in these verses, I mean, this is titled the children of Israel, and and it's interesting that for some reason in certain Quran translations among the so-called Muslims, they don't want to use the word Israel, so they actually even translate it in a way that it doesn't mention Israel, and but God is letting us know here about Muhammad, that he was taken from the sacred masjid to the farthest place of prostration, which is often translated as Masjid al-Aqsa. So there's a footnote for that. It says the Aqsa Masjid means the farthest place where there is prostration, many billions of light years away. This verse informs us that Muhammad the soul was taken to highest heaven to be given the Quran. So obviously, there's people who misinterpret that verse and use it to say, no, Muhammad was here, Muhammad was in Mecca, and then he was, I don't know, I don't remember the exact thing, but like he went on some horse or something, like to first to Jerusalem, to the masjid there, the masjid called Masjid al-Aqsa, and then he went upwards at the speed of light, to get the revelation of the Quran. But we understand that he was taken billions of light years away, straight to the farthest place as where he could go, possibly as a human being, and he was given the Quran billions of light years away, right? So if he went at the speed of light, it would take him billions of years, right, to get there. So he was definitely going way faster than the speed of light, and he was given the Quran. And God says, similarly, we gave Moses the scripture and rendered it a beacon for the children of Israel. So similarly, Moses was given a scripture too. Now the scripture that was given to Muhammad, it was given to him all at once when he went, right? But it was released slowly into his memory. And so I believe it says similarly, Moses was given the scripture too in the same manner. And some people have many theories around why they think that like Jesus is not mentioned here, but every people, we only know the information that we're given, and everything that is important for our salvation is here. So we don't have to speculate on things. A lot of times it is human tendency to want to speculate on things that don't count, right? Or want to look into things that we don't know, right? And the problem with that is that God tells us that Satan wants you to say things about God that you do not know, right? So we have to be careful that we don't go overboard in terms of trying to find things that are not necessary. You want to understand the Quran and read the Quran and understand it fully, right? But there is certain things your focus has to be sort of guided towards a common goal, which is the growth of your soul, right? And so certain details you might be curious to know, but at the same time you must ask yourself, like, is this really what I should focus on? Like, what is it my intention to just find out historically, or just for whatever other reason, or am I just trying to learn what I can to grow my soul? Like, right? Sometimes there's so much information, that you have to focus on what really matters to you, right? Obviously there's things to be learned, but we understand that, God could give us a book that was probably like this big, but that's not what we need. We need stuff that we can read and pass our tests in the hereafter. And if you were given a book, that's the beauty of the Quran, right? It has everything we need. So that's the beauty of the Quran, right? It has everything that you need, everything that's important for your salvation. What is not in the Quran, you don't need to think about it. And you should not be making statements when it comes to religions, for sure, that are not in the Quran, right? And God willing, we can talk about that more in detail later. So God says, verse number 3, these are descendants of those whom we carried with Noah. He was an appreciative servant. We address the children of Israel in the scripture, "You will commit gross evil on earth twice. You are destined to fall into great heights of arrogance. When the first time comes to pass, we will send against you servants of ours who possess great might, and they will invade your homes. This is a prophecy that must come to pass. Afterwards, we will give you a turn over them, and will supply you with a lot of wealth and children. We will give you the upper hand. If you work righteousness for your own good. But if you commit evil, you do so to your own detriment. Thus, when the second time comes to pass, they will defeat you and enter the masjid just as they did the first time. They will wipe out all the gains you had accomplished. Your Lord showers you with his mercy, but if you revert to transgression, we will counter with retribution. We have designated Gehenna as the final abode for the disbelievers." So these are prophecies that I believe actually already came to pass that are mentioned in the Quran. And as the verses describe, I mean, these were people that possessed great might, and they invaded these people, and then afterwards, the children of Israel, they got the upper hand, and they were given a lot of wealth and children. And then when the second time did come, again these people were defeated, and they lost it, and they were and they lost control of their masjid. And of course, this is referring to events that happen around the area of what we know as Jerusalem, right? So God says in verse 8, "Your Lord showers you with his mercy, but if you revert to transgression, we will counter with retribution. We have designated Gehenna as the final abode for the disbelievers." So, I mean, this was a simple law, and this was based on that, I mean, when you are not focused on God, when your priorities change, your course of life becomes different. I mean, God guarantees victory for the believers, right? So if we're on the right path, God supports us, God strengthens us. And if you're not on the right path, then we put ourselves in harm's way. We don't have God's support. And this is exactly what happened to these people as well. And it's a reminder for us too to remember that, it's very important for us to stay dedicated to God alone. I mean, sometimes people get occupied by the worldly possessions, to the point that they forget that God is the one who has given them these possessions. And when they get so caught up in those possessions, eventually it becomes their idol, so then God takes away, eventually they end up losing their idols. If you love anything more than God, as the Messenger of the Covenant explains, you will eventually lose it, right? Even if you don't lose it in this life, you will most likely lose it in this life, because obviously, you're not going to take them with you. You're definitely going to lose them in the hereafter, anyways, right? I mean, when you're dying and stuff. If you're dying a miserable death, I mean, you're not going to care for, whatever it is that was more valuable to you than God at the time when you can't even take care of yourself. So eventually, you end up losing it. So if you love something, love someone, we have to remember God and appreciate God for it, and lead our lives accordingly, right? Thanking God is, not just by lip service, but by our actions. And the more blessings we have, the more important it is for us, and the more knowledge we have, the more important it is for us to be appreciative and be thankful to God, for all of his blessings, including his guidance. Verse number 9, Quran are a means to salvation. This Quran guides to the best path and brings good news to the believers who lead a righteous life, that they have deserved a great recompense. As for those who disbelieve in the hereafter, we have prepared for them a painful retribution. The human being often prays for something that may hurt him, thinking that he's praying for something good. The human being is impatient. Okay, so I guess I'll stop here. So God tells us the Quran is our means to salvation. It guides us to the best path. We all know, acknowledge that, Quran is the final scripture, and it is our manual through which it's our roadmap through which we can get success in this life and in the hereafter. And God gives good news to the believers throughout the Quran over and over again, and to let them know that they will go to paradise. So that doesn't mean that like you and I read the verses and say, okay, well, God is telling me that I'm going to paradise, and then I become complacent. But this just gives us encouragement to look forward to the rewards in the hereafter, so that we can be motivated to do good things and continue to ask God for forgiveness, continue to be very careful in every step of the way to make sure that we don't flip towards the other side, and gain as much credit as we can, and stay away from any type of transgressions. So the good news is for the believers, right? And so we don't know exactly where we fall at this time, because we're still on earth, and we could go to heaven or we could go to hell, right? So, but God willing, all we can do is strive and work hard to redeem ourselves, as God says. There's nothing that comes easy when it in life, and it's the same for the hereafter. We can't just expect to not do anything and just sit there and expect to be in the highest heaven, as the so-called Muslims, for example, or the people of other faiths believe that they can do whatever they want, and then they're just going to get a free pass just because they took some idol as their god, based on some false promises by Satan. We understand that it's something that has to be hard earned. I mean, you don't get anything in this life. I mean, just in this world, I mean, we have to work so hard, to go to school, to go to work every day, to be able to make money so you can buy something or pay rent or something like that. And then people just expect to live forever in, huge palaces and mansions for no apparent work, and or struggles, so we have to remember that we have to ask God to help us and lead a righteous life, and then we can expect God. We can hope and pray to God to forgive us. So verse 12 says, "We rendered the night and the day two signs. We made the night dark and the day lighted, that you may seek provisions from your Lord therein. This also establishes for you a timing system and the means of calculation. We thus explain everything in detail." So these verses inform us that God has made the night and the day for us as a timing device, and for us to be able to calculate days, years, months, and He has made the day lighted so we can see God's provisions. I mean, imagine if there was perpetual darkness. I mean, if God wanted, He could have designed the world in a way that we could survive, let's say, in perpetual darkness too. But He created the night and the day, and obviously there's a lot of wisdom, behind having the light, even just for the part where it talks about to seek provisions, like what it does to the brain, and how it impacts your neurological pathways. I mean, there's so much science behind it, right? And all this God has created, to help us to do our job, and night for our rest, to make sure that we can rejuvenate our mind and restart, and all these. And I mean, if we just look at these things on its own, I mean that should make people believers. So God will not continue reading the videotape. We have recorded the fate of every human being. It is tied to his neck. On the day of resurrection, we will hand him a record that is accessible. Read your own record. Today you suffice as your own reckoner. Whoever is guided for his own good, and whoever goes astray does so to his own detriment. No sinner will bear the sins of anyone else. We never punish without first sending a messenger. And the footnote for 17:13 says, "Your life is already recorded as if on a videotape from birth to death. This same record will be made accessible to us upon resurrection. See 5722 and Appendix 14 for more details. So we understand from this that God's immaculate, impeccable system is so perfect, that no one can escape and hide from God in any way, and we cannot even challenge God on the day of judgment. It's so common that anytime someone's convicted of a crime in this world, their first response is to deny everything and fight their way out of it, right? Get a lawyer, fight their way out of it. And but on the day of judgment, that's not going to happen, because all our record is going to be with us. I mean, we'll have, let's say, imagine if somebody carrying their entire videotape of their whole life. How are they going to hide from anything? Like, even if you do something without your eyes seeing you, your hands already saw everything, right? I mean, it's perfect. And you have two recording angels that are designated on top of that, to make sure that everything is captured, and so on the day of judgment we'll be able to watch this whole thing, right, as a video. Like, you go to a video player and you scroll back and forth. I mean, you can watch everything, and not only that, but you can see which was the sin, what led you to hell, or what led you to heaven. I mean, where are the credits? It's going to be a full record, right, of your entire life. So nobody can fight that, right? And it is just for us to prove to us. Obviously, God already knew He doesn't have to do any of this, but it's for us to know what we deserve. God is the most just and the most merciful, and so He has a system in place that's pretty graceful and forgiving and generous, right? So if we still fail, it is just because of us, and it's just because of the fact that we were too arrogant and too egotistical, that we couldn't even take advantage of His lenient system. Obviously, He's most kind and merciful towards those who want to choose to be guided, But God says He's also strict in enforcing retribution for against people who are transgressors, right? So God's system is perfect. It doesn't mean that everybody, because He's so kind and merciful, everybody's just forgiven because they followed an idol. Obviously, idol worship is the number one thing that if you do it, all the other things could be forgiven. But if you maintain idol worship until the end of your life, there's no chance. There's no chance for this person. We say there's no chance in hell. There's no chance in hell that they will actually get out of hell, right? There's no chance it's going to be eternal. And but if we did our best to worship God alone and we didn't commit any sins, there's a lot of leeway for us. We commit a lot of sins on a daily basis we don't even realize. I mean, the other day we were talking about mentioning God's name on every action. I mean, there's so many actions that we do. I don't think we're even able to do every one of them. So we will forget, right? But God knows that, and God knows we're humans. God knows we're weak, and so God says He overlooks a lot of our sins, right? He overlooks them. Not that He sees everything, but He overlooks a lot of our sins, right? But He doesn't overlook our good deeds. When you do good, God makes sure it's counted. Even God says if you suffer a little bit of thirst, a little bit of hunger, all of that is counted. And all of that is recorded in this record, right? And if you committed a sin out of ignorance, and then you repented, not knowingly, but you did it out of ignorance, and then you repented right after you realized that it was a sin and you didn't do it after, then God forgives that sin. He wipes it out of your record completely, that as if you never did it, right? So this is how merciful God is, So verse 16 says, also part of verse 15 actually says, no sinner will bear the sins of anyone else. So, nobody can pay for anybody else's sins or suffer for anybody else's sins, and God says, God never punishes without first sending the messenger. So it's God's system. We understand that when He sends people, He first sends messengers, and then after that, when people disbelieve, when there's no chance left, no hope for these people to turn to God, then those people are annihilated, either individually or as a group, right? So this is God's eternal system. It doesn't change. It doesn't make exceptions. God has a system, and God says his system is unchangeable. God says in verse 16, if we were to annihilate any community, we let the leaders commit vast corruption therein. Once they deserve retribution, we annihilate it completely. Many a generation we have annihilated after Noah. Your Lord is most sufficient in dealing with the sins of his servants. He is fully cognizant, seer. So, mashallah, I mean, these are some heavy verses, right? If you think about it. God says that when he wants to annihilate a community, he lets its leaders commit vast corruption therein. And if we see, there are communities that are vastly corrupted and their leaders are vastly corrupt, and especially when you look at the religion, I mean, how corrupt they are and how devious, these people are, and what kind of lowliness they have stooped to in this world in the name of religion, or in the name of anything righteous. They've just completely done. They're just doing so much damage, right? And so this shows that God's retribution is coming nearer and nearer for people, and then when that happens, obviously these people are annihilated. And God says, many a generation we have annihilated after Noah. Many people, many generations were annihilated. So it's easy for God to do, and God says he's most efficient in dealing with the sins of his servants, right? So he does in a way that, his plan is carried out perfectly. Now in this world, when you want to try to annihilate a certain group, for example, you may have to do a lot of collateral damage and, so many things, until you can actually say that, okay, you got those people, let's say, without delving into specific political examples, right? If we were to go after, let's say, a group of people that were scattered, we couldn't do it. But God does it very efficiently. God knows who's a believer, who's a disbeliever, who deserves to be annihilated, and specifically those people are annihilated. Like, for example, the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, these people were specifically marked. There were stones that were specifically marked for these people to be annihilated. And rocks that were used, were designated for these people, right? So God's system is perfect. Choose your priorities carefully, this life, verse 18. Anyone who chooses this fleeting life as his priority, we will rush to him what we decide to give him. Then we commit him to Gehenna, where he suffers forever, despised and defeated. The hereafter. As for those who choose the hereafter as their priority and work righteousness while believing, their efforts will be appreciated. For each one of them we provide those and these from your Lord's bounties. Your Lord's bounties are inexhaustible. Note how we preferred some people above others in this life. The differences in the hereafter are far greater and far more significant. So, pretty self-explanatory, right? We have to choose our priorities carefully. And what that means is, yes, we have to prioritize our religion, our practices above everything else, So, what does that mean? That means that we schedule our daily activities also around our religious activities, right? Not the other way around. Like we schedule our activities around our contact prayers, around our Quranic studies, around everything that is important for us. When we wake up in the morning, we remember what are our priorities for the day, right? And what our goals are. So through these various choices that we make, we show to God what our priorities are. If your priority is not God, God is the last thing on your mind. You will plan your day in a way that, it's the last thing you do, right? If it's work, plan your work around the Quranic studies. Plan your work around your Friday prayers. right? And this proves with actions where your priorities lie. And you know, when you make choices in life, make sure that you're prioritizing your hereafter, you know, above any worldly gains, you know, any worldly benefits, because you know you're gonna get those anyways. You know, if you make God your God, you know, if you follow God and you do the right thing, God will give you everything. God will give you everything you need, your finances, whatever it is that you need. You'll have peace in your heart, you know, and He'll make sure all your needs are met, you know. So it's important that we prioritize our hereafter because that's the real life, you know. Imagine if you're playing in a theater and you have to do things certain as part of your role, and then you have your real life, and then you forget everything about your real life, and then you prioritize everything around that play. And what's going to happen? I mean, you'll probably do okay in the play, but what about the real life? You know, our real life is the one that is going to last for eternity. You know, if we don't plan for it and don't invest in our real life, we're actually going to lose. So it's the intelligent choice to plan for this world. I mean, God says, you know, He provides for these and for those, right? So there's a certain amount of food you can eat, let's say, right? I mean, you're not going to eat more than that, right? Whether you're a billionaire or just a regular average, you know, a person, you know, who makes a living of an average person, right? And you know, at the end of the day, I mean, your level of happiness is not gonna be, you know, it's not gonna be multiplied in the billions. Let's say if you became a billionaire, right? So just remember that, you know, your priority should be the hereafter, and if you prioritize your hereafter, everything else will be taken care of, you know. But it's really what matters that you make sure that is done, right? You might not become a billionaire. Who knows? You might, but you might not, right? Sure. But if you prioritize God, you know, you'll be happy, you know, and you'll be happy for eternity. And in the hereafter, you will have more than anything you can gather, right? So what's the intelligent choice? Obviously the hereafter, right? And so we should work towards it if we truly believe in the hereafter. And God says His provisions are inexhaustible. His boundaries are inexhaustible. So in the hereafter, imagine, you know, there's going to be no limit to anything that you want, right? So, I mean, it's a complete no-brainer for any person who truly believed in the hereafter to prioritize it, you know, because it is something that is the most valuable. Nothing else is valuable in this world as much as our hereafter, right? So we should plan towards our hereafter and live our life where we prioritize our hereafter more than anything. God says, note how we preferred some people above others in this life. The differences in the hereafter are far greater and far more significant. So, okay, looks like I'm going overboard. I'm sorry. Major commandments: you shall not set up any other god beside God, lest you end up despised and disgraced. The Lord has decreed that you shall not worship except God, and your parents shall be honored as long as one or both of them live. You shall never say to them, "Oof," the slightest gesture of annoyance, nor shall you shout at them. You shall treat them amicably. So these verses are pretty self-explanatory. These are major commandments. One, we cannot set any idols beside God. And the second most important commandment is we should honor our parents. And we should not say a slightest gesture of annoyance to them, right? So, I mean, this is this can in itself can be a test for a lot of people, you know. And so you have to make sure that we appreciate our parents and respect them and honor them. You know, they go through a lot to raise us and care for us, and it is our responsibility to treat them kindly, you know, just as they raised us, and you know, not even show a little gesture of annoyance to them. So with this, God willing, I'll end. If you guys have any comments or questions at this point, please feel free.
MashaAllah, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
MashaAllah. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody has any comments or questions about the verses we read? Okay, I think while you guys are thinking about what verses to comment on, I just want to continue talking about the parents. So God says, don't you should never say to them, "Oof," right? That's the slightest gesture of annoyance. So, nor shall you shout at them. So, um, it's very very important, and it can be difficult sometimes for people because you may have like a generation gap, or you may have other differences, and sometimes it can get annoying for children, because they're at a different level than the parents, and sometimes parents could be telling them something based on their wisdom that the child may not understand, and they may respond in a manner that is really bad for them. So I mean, I definitely have seen that anybody who wants to be happy and be successful in life, this is one trait that I see is, and people especially who have some kind of empathy, that they're kind to their parents, understand the sacrifices that the parents have made, and it is very important to be respectful. I mean, I don't think there's anything I can say to stress more than what the verse is already saying, is not even a slightest gesture of annoyance, right? Treat them very kindly as much as you can, right? Um, and you'll see that naturally, I mean, you'll feel happy, more fulfilled in your life, and you'll have less problems. People generally, I've seen, and you find people who have issues with their families, like resentment and stuff like that. I mean, they end up having so many problems as a result of that, right? But there's other people that may have had terrible experiences, but they're thankful for their parents and they're happy with it. Or they forgive them. So I think those are the kinds of people that will end up being strong in life and successful, just in general, based on the system God has created, right? I mean, you don't have to do a whole lot, right, to understand that. I mean, just basic psychology, just understanding and accepting things and letting go, I mean, all these concepts, that God teaches us in the religion. Um, not even showing a slightest gesture of annoyance is very important. That's the standard that we have to follow. All right. So, are there any comments from anyone about the verses? All right. Did anybody have a comment?
just to say, brother, if I had something to say, I'd be the first one to say it. I don't want to not bring it forward. But yeah, no, you explain things very well. It's just a lot to think about, right?
Definitely. Especially for people who have kids, they're wondering, I get more than just a gesture of annoyance. No, hopefully not.
Well, yeah, you always get the hum and haw, right? Okay, go clean your room,
Right.
But God guide us to be more respectful. It is difficult to like. I don't have the best relationship with my parents. That being said, it is a difficulty. It is a major test, right? God willing, I find that fine line, right?
Absolutely.
Suleman, can you read the chat?
Yeah, so Brother Jaffer, he has asked a question. He says, it's not like that we fight, but we don't share the same ideas, and I invited them to submission without success, so I don't go to them. Should I force myself to go? Right. I mean, if you have hope for your parents, then you should, force yourself to visit them. And you don't have hope for your parents? No hope. Okay, so you believe they're destined for hell. Well, you have to be sure, right? But if you're sure that's the case, then it's fine, But if you have, yeah. So yeah, in that case, then what we have to do what Abraham did. We just disown them, because they're disbelievers that are destined for hell. Once Abraham realized, like, so many people think that, no, if your parents have to give you a threat to kill you or something, right? No, God says every disbeliever is an enemy of his Lord, right? So they're God's enemies. If you have tried to give them the message and you have come to a sincere realization with certainty that no matter what, these people are not going to change, there's no chance, no hope for them, then you're not supposed to be around such people, right? Whether they're your parents or your children or your anybody, right? You have supposed to run for your life. So that is fine. I wouldn't even give charity to such people, right? I would give charity to people who are believers. I would force myself to be with believers. You may have relatives that you may have hope for. You should regard them more than rather than people who are 100% you have no hope for, right? So you don't want to be around those people, right? And John posted, the human being often prays for something that may hurt him, thinking that he's praying for something good. The human being is impatient. He says, another great example of God's omnipotence and omniscience. He knows what's best for us and sees from everywhere. We humans sometimes see from a small finite angle. May God make our prayers the correct ones. Yeah, in my case, I always had hope for my parents, but somehow I was never able to have like a fluid, conversation, a fluent conversation with them about religion. Like, we talk a little bit and then get interrupted by something else, or they'd change the subject or something like that, and we just never ended up talking about it until they both passed away, but if you have tried with your parents excessively and you have reached to a point where you realize that there's no chance for them, then then you don't have to be around them, you know. Totally fine. And you shouldn't be around them, actually. So there's actually another thing. It's sometimes difficult when the kids ask for their grandparents. Yeah, I mean, you have to be very careful, you know, because the kids are young and impressionable, and you know, you sent them to these people. I mean, you have a responsibility, right? So, yeah, I mean, you should just have to explain to your children that, you know, find a way to explain it to them, you know. Because, you know, then you're just putting your children in harm's way. They're gonna see their grandparents in this case and like, yeah, no, but grandparents say this or that or do this or that, and so, you know, they will, you know, it will confuse them too, you know. Many children don't have grandparents, you know, they're fine. It's not necessary. Yeah, I mean, eventually you'll lose your children if you do things like that, right? Yeah. So I don't know, Mona, what your point is, but I'm gonna read the two verses you posted. The second commandment, 31, 14, and 15. So these are obviously God is telling you to treat them, but it's not talking about parents who you have no hope for, right? I mean, your parents could be ignorant and they could tell you about worshiping idols, right? But you could still have hope for them, and those are the parents that you should see them. You should be nice to them, right? I mean, there's two kinds of idol worshippers, right? There's one idol worshiper who has hope, and there's one who doesn't have hope, right? So just because it says that they're idol worshippers and we have to be kind doesn't mean that if they're destined for hell and we have no hope for them, that we should still be with them. You know, you have to disown people who are disbelievers, who are stuck hopelessly in disbelief. You can't befriend anybody like that. You can't be around them. I mean, these are hypocrites, really, you know.
Assalamualaikum.
So like,
Sorry, I'm not really present tonight, but so it's the 31:15. It says if they try to force you to set up idols beside me, do not obey them, but continue to treat them amicably in this world. So it says it here. So even if the parents are idol worshiper,
does
even
it
if
say
they
that the parents
force you
have
to do
lost hope?
that.
It doesn't say
Where
that,
did
right?
you find the last hope, though?
Huh? Does it mean? I mean,
Where
it's
did you
because
say?
God tells us that people who are destined for hell, people who have no hope, they're stuck hopelessly in disbelief. You should have to disown them, right? That's the same case with Abraham's father. That's why Abraham's disowned his father, right?
So Abraham's father was trying to kill him.
So what's the
Just
difference?
like
Like, is it
just
the
like
killing that makes a difference, or is it the
they're
fact that he was
they're
ready?
actively fighting. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
because
So
they were
it's
actively fighting him, though.
okay. So it's the fact that he was actively fighting which showed the extent of his disbelief, right? It wasn't that he was trying to kill him, so he has to save his life and disown him, right? It's the fact that he's so hung up against the religion that you know, he has no hope for this person, right? Now, when do you lose hope for the person is not when he wants to kill you, but you can lose hope for a person without him wanting to kill you too, right? There's not all parents would want to can kill your parents. Like, no parent will tell you these days that I'm going to kill you, right? And they won't, because they're going to get caught up by the law, right? But just because they're not going to do that, or some people even might, right? But the thing is, that's not That's not the criteria, right? A person is the criteria for disowning people is not because they are your personal enemies. It's because they're God's enemies, right? God's enemies means what? They're fighting who? They're not fighting you, they're fighting God. How are they fighting God? By disbelieving, right? They're fighting God by disbelieving. I mean, God tells them, you know, you should worship me alone, and they insist on their idolatry, and they have no hope, right? So you should not befriend those people. And the messenger of the covenant even gives examples, like he gave example of a beggar. You know, you have a beggar, let's say, and he needs money, and you know that for whatever reason that this person is an idol worshiper, and you know he's bound for hell, you know, and he says you don't help them, you run away from him, right? So I mean, obviously this is not a person who you can give the message to and he may be receptive, right? And he's not definitely fighting you too, quote unquote, right? He's just a beggar on the street, but for whatever reason you have realized that there's no hope for this person, and no matter what, he's a disbeliever, so you have to run away from him. And this is why the verse doesn't discriminate, right, about people you have to run away from. It doesn't. So I mean, imagine if you just had to run for your life from people who were just fighting you, you know, in today's world, and then what, right? As soon as he's realized he was an enemy of God, he disowned him, right? So what is an enemy of God? You must ask, right? An enemy of God. God says a disbeliever is an enemy of his Lord. Anybody who's a disbeliever is an enemy of his Lord. And who is a disbeliever? Person who has no hope, who you know is destined for hell, right? Because other than that, everybody is a potential believer, right? And we treat everybody in the best way. But a person who has no hope is a disbeliever. And God says the disbeliever is an enemy of his Lord. And God says, as soon as he realized he was an enemy of his Lord, he disowned him. Not as soon as he realized he was about to kill him. As soon as he realized he was an enemy of God, he disowned him. So people who are going to hell, that's something we have to think about, right? Why are people going to hell? You know, is anybody going to hell who is not an enemy of God? Why would God do that, right? All the people who are going to hell are enemies of God. Right? We have to know that not just people who are fighting us. People who are going to hell really deserve it. They're all, and God is putting them to hell because those are God's enemies. Now, obviously, you know, we all have parents. I had parents, and they were idol worshippers, and I respected them. But you know, it wasn't like I had no hope for them because I could talk to them. A lot of times they were receptive. A lot of things I said made sense to them. But you know, and I respected them, mashallah. Since I became a submitter, I tried, you know. But there are parents out there that, you know, you would try to give them a message, and you know, they don't accept, or they're hostile. You know, but the hostility is just a symptom. You know, hostility in itself is not the thing that's bad based on which you disown, because as if the hostility is going to affect your mentality or something, you know, that you are supposed to stay away from. No, the hostility is just a sign that shows that this person, there's no way this person is going to get the message, that his mind is made up, you know, that he doesn't care no matter what you do, they're not going to be guided, right? Not everybody is going to be a fighter and going to confront you, right? That's not the thing. So is the main problem is a disbelief. You find out based on their action that they're so adamant that they're even willing to kill you. That's how you realize that. But you know, when you say they're not fighting you, but they're actively fighting God by doing that, right? Who's actively fighting God? People who are actively worshiping idols, right? They're not actively fighting you. They're not your enemies, but they're God's enemies. They're not enemies of the believers, but they're still God's enemies, right? Okay. So it says in 58:22, run for your life. You will not find people who believe in God and the last day befriending those who oppose God and his messenger. Okay? Even if they were their parents, even if they were their parents or their children, right? You're responsible for your children, even if they were your children or your siblings or your tribe. For these he decrees faith into their hearts and supports them with inspiration from him, admits them into gardens with flowing streams wherein they abide forever. So what does it say? It doesn't say anything about fighting, right? There are people who oppose God and his messenger, right? Even after you give them the guidance, they're opposing God and they're opposing the messenger. How? Just by disbelieving. They don't have to do anything other than say, I don't care. And what are they going to say? Like, imagine, what are those people's thoughts if you think about it, right? Do they think that the messenger of God, let's say Dr. Khalifa in this case, he was a messenger? No, they'll say he was an imposter, right? Or other prophets for that matter, depending on who you're talking to, right? So they're opposing God, right? God is saying worship God alone, and they're saying, no, I will worship my idols. I don't care what you're saying. I don't care what God is saying in the Quran. I don't care what verses you show me. I'm just going to do whatever I want, and I don't care about this messenger or this book. Don't talk to me about it. I don't like it, And if you talk about it, it irks them and they get upset, It, displeases them, when they hear the word of God. So what do? They oppose you. They tell you to stop, right? They don't want to hear the message. That's when you lose hope for a person, right? When they don't even want to hear, like, they're not open-minded at this point. Yeah, exactly. If you oppose the messenger, you also oppose God, because it's God's messenger that God has sent. Yeah, I can't say that I've seen anybody who is righteous, who has parents that they know are going to hell and then they're kind to them.
So we're saying that if they're actively rejecting the message and you have no hope for them,
No,
then
I'm
they're
saying
in the
if you
category of
have no hope for
running.
them, if
Mm-hmm.
you have no hope for them, that's if you know for a fact that they're going to hell, right? If you reach the point of conclusion, regardless of whether
Mm-hmm.
they're wanting to kill you or not, Also, there's some parents that will not tell you beforehand, look, Mona, I'm trying to kill you, or I want to kill you, okay? Someone who really wants to kill you may even come and secretly poison you or something, right? So don't go by the fact that, they have to want to kill you. They may be very sweet talking too. That's not the criteria, right? But when you come to a point of realization that you have no hope for a person, that's up until that point you treat that person better than anybody else, like very good, as good as possible. And especially your parents, you have to honor them. If they're believers, great. But if they're not, they're idol worshippers, and you still have hope for them. That's you still treat them nicely. You still regard them. You still give them your charity, even if they're idol worshippers. But you have hope that maybe someday they will change. But if you don't have hope, I'm talking specifically about the situations where you've come to a conclusion that you have exhausted all means, and you realize that, what, there's no point in talking to this person. This person is an enemy of God. They're going to hell because they don't care about God. They don't care about the message, and they're worshiping whatever idols there, whether it's the ego or whatever else. That's the situation we're talking about, right? Fighting you is not a criteria. What I'm saying, the criteria, fighting you is just a symptom of them being, hopelessly stuck. That they have gone to a point where they're ready to do anything just for you to shut your mouth. So, but the thing is, it just it's a sign, right? It's just a sign of their hostility towards God, right? But they don't have to. Not everybody's going to do that. Some people will not even come in front of you, right? Let's look at the Saudis, like people who are behind the worst things, right? I mean, a lot of them didn't even show their face in front of the message, but they were all fighting God, right? Now, imagine if people started befriending those people. I mean, whether they were parents or not. I mean, just a hypothetical example, right? So it's not it's not just the fighting part, basically. I hope I made my point. Oh yeah, but yeah, I mean, just think about it because it's very important,
So thank you.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention, though, inshallah, God willing, we can talk about it in the Saturday study, God willing, because I know Masood and Shima are not here. But there was some discussion recently about animals, and we were discussing animals, and some people were saying that the animals are able to understand us completely, and based on the verses about Solomon with the hoopoe and the ants, right? And so wanted to talk about that because there was a lot of confusion about that, and I just wanted to share verses from the Quran and from common sense and from science and practical experience and just again common sense. I can't stress enough on that part because I mean this is something that can easily be proven without a lengthy discussion, right? If you think that animals understand you completely, I mean, I want to save some of the discussion for them when they're online. Everyone is online, so we can have a more fulfilling discussion. But definitely, I think it's important that we don't come up with absurd statements that we can't back it up. Imagine we start telling people, and it just will repulse people, right? The reason why submission attracts me or anybody else for that matter, because there's no nonsense in the Quran, right? I mean, when the verses say that God created the earth in 6 days, I know it's a yardstick. It wasn't actually created in 6 days, and so I know that there's no nonsense in the Quran. But imagine, obviously, how the traditional Muslims, started creating all this nonsense around the religion, and so if we start repeating the same kinds of things without actually thinking about it, I mean, I'm not trying to sound insulting or anything, but God says He has given us the ears, the eyesight, and the brain, and we should verify it, right? So if you think an animal in the street can just understand you, go and talk to him by all means, and try to give him instructions and see how well they understand it, right? Or go bring an animal into the house and tell them to not pee in the house, like when they have no training, right? This absolutely makes no sense whatsoever for people to say things like that make blanket statements that animals understand us completely just because we have two isolated examples that were just limited to Solomon, right? And when we talk about Solomon, I mean, we understand that it was not an ordinary situation, and he had extraordinary ability to communicate with these animals. So he could teach them anything he wanted. And when I said that he could teach them anything he wanted, someone made the comment like, well, it doesn't say in the Quran that Solomon trained, the hoopoe or something like that, right? But we know that it doesn't literally say he trained them, but you don't put anyone in your army without training them, right? Imagine you're recruiting people in your army. You're just going to recruit them and not give them any training? I mean, what is that army going to do for you? Right? So and with birds, yeah, I mean, birds can memorize things, right? They have ability to understand and memorize things, but they don't understand any language, and nobody can understand any language without you teaching the language to them, right? I have to show you an apple and say this is an apple for you to understand that this is what an apple is, right? I'm not going to say apple and then you automatically know what an apple is, right? That doesn't make any sense. So thinking that an animal just flying to a foreign country or something like that, and they're able to understand everybody, all the humans, like some kind of universal language that we speak that we don't even know we speak, and they understand it, that is very bizarre, you know? And we shouldn't have such understandings. I feel that, I mean, it would just repulse people, you know? It's not scientifically backed up. I said no. I said there have been scientific studies that show the limitations of understanding of their abilities to understand humans, and so the response was like, I don't base my opinions on scientific studies. I base my opinions based on the verse of the Quran, which is good, but God tells us again to use our eyes, ears, and brains. So we have to, like, how are you going to verify that? You're going to use your eyes, ears, and brains and verify, right? How do you verify it? You go and you talk to somebody, or you see somebody, and you verify things, right? So you go to these animals, talk to them, and verify it if you don't believe in science. But how else are you going to verify, right? You don't verify something you heard about someone in the Quran and the verses. You have to go and investigate the situation outside of the Quran. So if you're making statements that are not backed up in the Quran, you're going to go verify it outside by looking at studies or doing your own experiments, But we can't make statements that we can just there's just no head and body to support those statements, But God willing, I have more verses to talk about it. God willing, maybe we can talk about it in the Saturday study. Anybody else has any comments? Are there any? So there is a comment from John. He said, sorry, there's a bunch of comments I missed, sorry. It says, Abraham disowned him on the basis of Abraham realizing he's an enemy of God. Sister Mona, he had nothing to do with the threat of being, it had nothing to do with the threat of being killed. It was once he realized he was an enemy of God, idol worshiper, that he had no hope, exactly. And then Jaffa said, thank you for clarifying, mashallah. And then John mentioned, if you oppose the messenger, you also oppose God, like the Arabs who think that they only oppose the messenger, but they're not opposing God. They're actually doing both and don't realize. And then John says, if I start worshiping the sun and doing prayers, etc., and let's say a gecko is watching me, I highly doubt that they have the slightest clue of what I'm doing. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, they might have an idea, but it's not like the level of understanding that that they were saying. Like they said, they completely understand us. So it's not that they can look at you and think maybe you're doing some kind of worship, or if they see you eating, they know you're eating, right? But if you tell them, oh, I made it with lentils and tomato and potatoes and a bunch of other vegetables, and they will be like, no, absolutely what you're telling them, right? It's not that, but if you think of Solomon and his army, he had the ability to teach them things, right? So he could translate, tell them what everything means. Because he understood their language, right? But the everyday hoopoe that you can fetch one or get one from the pet store, nobody like Solomon has actually taught anything to that bird, right? So anyways, that's an interesting thing. I'd love to talk about it more, but I don't know. I'm afraid I don't insult anybody's intelligence, because it's hard to explain it without sounding like I'm condescending in any way, because it's just, common sense. Yeah. No, inshallah. I'm trying to say what I think. MashaAllah, yes. But Jafar said, please don't just say what you think. That's always the best. Yeah, Brother Abdullah shared 2544 says, do you think that most of them hear or understand? They're just like animals. No, they are far worse. Right, exactly. Yeah, inshallah, we'll definitely discuss this further in the Saturday study. So, God willing, we're all on the same page. God willing. All right. So, are there any other comments or questions? Anyone? If not, then God willing, we will conclude our study. So thank you all for joining us. God willing, our next English Quran study would be on Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. God bless you all. MashaAllah, thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. God bless everyone.
Okay.